Good afternoon. This video is to go over the content on online discussion forums that was presented in this morning's synchronous online session for the three-step online Build Your Canvas class workshop. And this is the presentation that we went over, and you can find this on the optional synchronous meetings schedule page in Canvas, and from there you can actually access this handout as well, which contains some information on the active online discussions workshop that CTL runs every semester that this particular workshop or session was based off of. So I'm going to go through it here, but you can actually view the full handout on your own later. So one of the first things that's really important about discussion forums is thinking about the role that they play in your online class, and you do that through thinking about what kind of questions you are asking and the purpose that the discussion forums have for your assessments and activities in the class, and that's in that ideate phase. The other aspects of the discussion posts online that we'll cover today have to do with the administrative pieces of how long discussion forum posts need to be, when will they be due, when will students post their initial post, when will they post their replies, and then obviously the big one of how are you going to interact with students in the forums, how frequently will you reply to students, and how frequently will students reply to one another. So we'll go ahead and get started. There's more information on these particular stages in that handout I referenced a little bit ago. So one of the first things to really think about when you're scheduling your discussion forums and online is, can you keep up with them? So if you schedule discussion forums every week, that's a lot of reading for you, and that's a lot of grading, but it's also can be a lot of work for students, knowing that discussion forum assignments are a public place that writing gets posted. And when you post something publicly, it sometimes means that people spend more time on it than they would an assignment that they were just submitting to you as the instructor. So there's this cognitive load issue that can happen when you have too many discussion forums in a class. And so a good rule of thumb that I often encourage, and it doesn't work for everybody in every class, is to do discussion forums every other week and alternate those forums with individual assignments that students do. And that usually creates a nice balance of discussion forums and individual work that will then also make it easier for you to give feedback on those forums in the off week. The other thing that you really have to think about is what kind of questions you're going to ask. And one of the main issues that we see in the Center for Teaching and Learning when we are consulting with faculty on discussion forums, if they come into the office and they're like, my discussion forums aren't working, it usually has to do with the type of questions that are being asked. So if you want students to discuss their ideas and have a conversation around a topic, it's really important that you don't ask right or wrong or yes or no questions, because if every student is posting the same answer, what is there to talk about? So one tool that we really encourage you to use when you are creating your discussion forums is Bloom's taxonomy. And this slide is showing a very abbreviated version of Bloom's taxonomy where some of the categories have been combined. But the point here is if your questions are in this remember, understand category, a lot of times if you ask students to summarize something, they're all going to come up with something very similar, unless one of them misses the point, and then it's off, and then it's just wrong. So when you have something like this, it's not encouraging a lot of conversation. If you move your discussion questions more into these upper level categories of apply, analyze, create, and evaluate, if this is the learning goal, what is created from that is going to be a lot more open for comments from other students, for interpretation, for students to add more information, to dispute a particular point of view. And that's going to lead to a lot better discussion experience than asking students to define a concept that really only has one definition. Now, if you're asking students to define something that is culturally defined, then that's obviously going to be a little bit broader. It's not going to be, the dictionary definition of this is this. So you're going to have to obviously take this in the context of your subject matter. But ask simple questions, get simple answers, and no discussion. So the other thing that's really important in discussion forums is to make sure that your instructions are clear. This particular slide is giving you a heads up on the things that you need to identify before you create your posts, and the handout that was linked on the first slide of this presentation shows an example of how a discussion forum prompt breaks down and covers all of these questions. But students need to know what they need to post, so the questions they need to answer. They need to know if they are supposed to hit reply and post in the text editor in Canvas, or if they're supposed to attach something, or if they're supposed to respond with a video or maybe an audio recording. The other thing that you need to make sure that you do is include your deadline. So when is the initial post due and when are the replies due? Other thing that you need to make sure that students are clear on is how long their initial reply is supposed to be and how long their responses are supposed to be. And if you don't make these things explicit, then you're going to end up with different responses from different students, different lengths. And the deadlines for the initial reply and the replies, it's usually a good idea to make sure that you pick a structure at the beginning of the semester and stick with that throughout the rest of the semester. So if in the beginning of the semester you have your initial post due on Wednesday and your replies due by Sunday, then you're going to want to keep that schedule throughout with very little deviation, because that will definitely throw students off. One of the big issues with discussion forums is how frequently you as the faculty member post or interact in those forums. And what we discussed this morning in the session was choosing a role for yourself as a facilitator in the discussion forum. So if you are wanting to reply to every single student's post in the forum, that's going to represent a lot of work, and it also has the side effect of limiting student interaction. So the more that you post, the less that they interact with one another. So it's usually better to back off a little bit from the post to everyone and choose like a number. So if you have 10 students, you'll respond to 4 of the 10. So then if you have 20 students, you would respond to 8. So it's like a percentage. And then another method of doing it is to consider yourself a guide on the side and actually let students know that the way that you will respond to them is you will grade their posts privately. You will privately evaluate them as an instructor, but then you will also, throughout the length of the forum, you'll post any additional information that students seem to be missing. You'll add any sort of discussion continuation pieces that you think that the conversation needs to go that way and it doesn't seem to be going that way. You'll add those. Obviously, you'll be able to provide any clarification of areas of confusion that are seem to be coming up in the forums. So that is like one, there's a couple different ways of doing it when you reply. I would not suggest thinking that you're going to reply to every single post that's in the forum. And then another option for you is to consider, if your class size supports it, consider allowing a few of your students to moderate the forums. So it's their responsibility to go through and prod discussion, further discussion in certain ways, a follow-up with particular posts that don't seem to have enough information. And so you can assign a couple of students to moderate individual forums throughout the semester, and it's part of their grade. And then that also helps you to sort of lighten the burden on yourself to moderate as the discussions are going on. In all cases, no matter how you are interacting in the forums, a point that came up in the session this morning was to also include a synthesis post at the end, or a summary that basically summarizes all the major points that were made in the forum. And this is particularly important if you are wanting to use the discussion forum in any other activity or assignment later. So if students are asked to reference anything in the forum, that summary and synthesis post can be really valuable for that. So when we're talking about assessing, I'm going to actually demo some things in Canvas for you so that you can see some of the ways or the technology tools that can make grading discussion forums a lot easier. And a lot of the stuff that I'll demo for you here is where all of the questions in the session came through, so I'm going to answer those as well here for reference purposes. So let me go ahead and open that up. So in Canvas, when you are creating discussion forums, the first thing that you need to make sure of if you are needing to create a discussion forum with a rubric is that you are checking the option that the discussion forum is graded. Unless you do that, it it won't show you the option to add a rubric, so you need to make sure that it is graded, and then you'll want to enter how many points that discussion forum is worth. So I'll add a title. The instructions would go here. The other option is this: users must post before seeing replies. And what that does is if you click this, it creates a blind discussion post. And what blind discussion posts are is students have to post their own initial post before they are allowed to see the rest of what is in the forum. So if you have an issue with students copying each other's work, or maybe just repeating the same thing in a slightly different way, this is one way that you can help preserve that originality of posts from students, because they can't see each other's work until they do their part. And then I've already set it to be graded and worth 10 points. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And now to add a rubric, if I go to the actual discussion, and you can do this to any discussion forums, if I'm on the discussions page or in the module view, I just click the title of the discussion, and once I'm on this page, I go to these three dots and then I say add rubric. Once you do this, it's going to bring up this interface, and there are two different types of rubrics that you can create. One of them uses the evaluation criteria, the rating scales here. So you change the description of the criterion by using the little pencil icon, and then you put in the title of the criterion there. You can add additional information in this long description. And then you can actually now change the ratings as well. So I want 3, and you need to name it. So this one will be like partial marks. It just depends on what your rating scales are called. And so you'll see here that I put one in the middle, 530. And this number here, the total, is always going to equal the highest number of points available in this particular rating scale. To add a new criterion, I click that button. It's going to give me the option to do a new or to duplicate. I'm just going to duplicate. I'm going to rename this something else. Critical thinking. I don't want that to be worth 5 points. I want that to be worth 3 points at a maximum. So I update that, and then I have to update this other one as well. So this one's going to be 1 and then 0. And so note here that that 3 matches the top level there. So this can get a little wonky. You'll get the hang of it after you do it a couple of times. Always start with this high level when you're creating them. It makes it a lot easier to then go down and adjust the lower ones. So in this particular example, I would want to make sure that I click the option to use the assignment for grading so it shows up in the SpeedGrader. The other option for rubrics is, rather than putting all of these ratings and these sort of criteria rating scales in, is you put the criteria in and you specify the point value, and then you click this "I'll write freeform comments when assessing students." When I click this, you'll notice that all of the individual point values for the rating scales went away, and now this is just an empty space. So those are the two different types of rubrics. You can have the scales, or you can have just this "I'll write freeform comment." So I'm going to show you next what they look like in the SpeedGrader. In order to have your students access the rubric, they go into the discussion forum just like you do, click those 3 dots, and instead of add rubric, they're going to see show rubric. So if I refresh this, now you can see they'll see show rubric. So what this ends up looking like in the SpeedGrader is, if you are grading using a rubric that has actual evaluative criteria in it, so their rankings, if I go to the SpeedGrader for this discussion forum, you can see here that there is a example here for view rubric, and you can see that the discussion rubric here is listing out the different ratings criteria, and to assign that particular grade to a student, all you have to do is click that box. So you can see here that I clicked that. I can drag this over to make it bigger, and you can see it automatically populated that with a 2. So I'm going to say 0 on that one, 7 on this one, and 3 on that one. You can see it's automatically adding those up, and if I click this little comment box, there's room for comments based on each set of criteria. And there's also a place to provide an overall comment here at the bottom if you prefer. So you'll click Save underneath the rubric. It's going to populate out the points right there, and then you'll click Submit for any comments there. So that's how easy it is to grade using the evaluative criteria, the rankings. You just go click, click, click. If you are wanting to grade with the open form comment, what that ends up looking like is this. You'll hit View Rubric, and what you see here is instead of things to click, you're going to have these boxes to add comments. And the cool thing about this is if you have a comment that you would like to save to reuse, you type your comment and then click Save this comment for reuse. And if you went to grade this again in the next student, it would pop up. So I've saved this comment from another student for an example, and now when I'm back into this in grading a different student's work, it's pulled that in for me right there. So I can just use that drop down to select that saved comment. So that can save you a lot of time when grading in between students. I think Canvas is assuming that you wouldn't have a saved comment for the same two criteria, and that's why it's not giving you that option within this assignment itself, but it would with the next student. So the last thing that we discussed in this session was one other way of managing discussion forums with large enrollments in your courses is using groups for discussion forums to create a smaller sort of community environment for students. So if you have 100 or 200 students in a class, having that many posts in a discussion forum, a faculty pointed out, was very overwhelming. So what they did is they created groups so that students could have a smaller discussion experiences. And so the conversation sort of went on there of like how big of a group, and one faculty shared the experience that she had them grouped in a size of like 15, and some students were like they preferred to have a few more. So I think the number we kind of decided upon was 20 to 25. So the really nice thing about Canvas is that it enables you to create groups pretty easily, and you can create randomized groups. And one thing that kind of came up during the session is, although discussion groups can make the community feeling a little bit easier, like a more welcoming to students because there's not as many people, it can also get kind of repetitive throughout the semester. So it might be a good idea to shuffle those groups around 3 or 4 times during the amount of the semester. And so when you create your groups, because it's easy to randomize your group sets, it's pretty easy to do that. So I wanted to demo just real quickly how to set up those groups and select that random option. So you'll find the option to create groups in the People tab, and then you'll go to Groups, and then you'll do plus Group Set. I'm not going to save any of the work I do here because I don't want to put all of you into groups inside of our training workshop. So what you'll do is you'll name the group set name, and so this group set name has to do with either assignments that are associated with it or the time of the semester. So if we were just to call this, let's say I was going to have 4 group sets throughout the semester for our discussions, I'm just going to call this first group set. So you can allow self-sign-up, which allows students to kind of determine amongst themselves their groups. I don't think that's a great idea unless it's a graduate class where the students kind of know each other and are self-selecting into groups based on topic interests. If you have a lot of students, this would be a nightmare. So I would leave that off and instead do split groups into, and then choose how many groups. So if you have 100 students in your class and you wanted to do groups of 20, then you would put this up at 5 groups. So that way you're going to have 5 groups of 20 to equal the 100 students. And you probably don't need to worry about group members being in the same section unless you're using a combined course. Alternatively, you can also create the groups manually. If you had some information that you knew that meant that they needed to be grouped in a certain way, you would do that by clicking the I'll create groups manually. But to randomize the group structures, you just use that option there. And then you can select automatically assign a student group leader and then choose this random student as group leader. And what that does when you are assigning a student group leader is it enables the student, whether it is the first student to join or a random student, it enables them to change the name of their group, their individual group, and it also enables them to add or remove members. If you don't want students to have that capability, then you just leave that box unchecked and then click Save. So like I said, I'm not going to save this because I don't want to put you into groups. So that was everything that we talked about this morning in the session, hopefully in a little bit more concise manner. I welcome any questions that you have about anything here. You can post those into the Q&A forum, and I hope to see you in some of our future sessions.